Ladies and gentlemen, happy Sunday night. We're at Unlock the Middle once again, having an opportunity to really recognize people from around the world and talk about the great things in public education. My name is Dean Packard. I'm the proud principal of Bay Path Regional Vocational Technical High School, and I'm with Chris and Josh tonight. We got the threesome in the house. What more can you ask for? So good to see you guys. Hey, first and foremost, happy Sunday, Chris. Happy Sunday, Josh. How are you? And great to see you. Let's start off with you, Chris. Great to have you back in action.
Fired up, man. Thanks for the intro to the show, Dean. Principal Grafton Middle School here. I am fired up about learning. I'm coming off a great experience at the Massachusetts School Administrator Association Conference, where I got to connect with a whole bunch of other educational leaders across the state, talking about teaching and learning. Met with Commissioner Riley and learned a lot about the direction of where it is that we're going. And I got to tell you, these opportunities fire me up because it helps make us better, helps make our colleagues better, and helps make our students learn at higher levels. Josh, how are you tonight, my brother?
There you go. Don't forget about our friend from Texas.
What's going on, everybody? Josh Towat, principal of Memorial Pathway Academy in Garland ISD, Garland, USA. Ready to rock and roll, the flagship show. It normally runs at 7, but you know what? That number one word is flexibility in public education. We always need to be flexible. Be the Gumby channel. And a lot of you don't understand what I just said when I said Gumby, but it's okay. It doesn't matter because you know what matters is that we're stronger together. So if you are in Alaska or Hawaii, in your Maine or Florida or anywhere in the 48, we need you, the tool set that you're bringing to, because we have an awesome guest tonight. What do you think about that, Chris and Dean?
Hey, listen, first and foremost, Chris, hold on one second. We have Ryan Tillman in the background, and I'll tell you something. The more I learn about him, the more I just kind of smile, because in our business, it's all about finding movers and shakers that try to make the world a little bit better for everybody around them, and Ryan is one of those type of individuals. So, Chris, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. Do you want to say something?
No, I was just saying, Gumby and Eddie Murphy, the old Saturday
Night Live. Well, I don't know where you're going with that.
Deep in my heart, Josh.
Bro, you're the oldest one. Come on, you know.
You're calling me the oldest.
You were there.
Christ. Come on, man.
You were there.
Well,
come on. Chris is right behind me. I think he's got one. Wait a second. We're not even going to discuss age right now because Ryan is the baby in the house, and it doesn't matter who's older right now. Hey, let's get him in here for a second, okay? Ryan Tillman, welcome to Unlock the Middle. Glad to have you with us, man. Ryan, we've been blessed to have about 500 shows so far, and now you are on with us. I can't wait to hear about your story. So first and foremost, welcome to the show.
Fellas, thank you guys so much, man. I appreciate it. And I did get the Gumby reference. I am not young enough to not know who Gumby is. I know exactly who Gumby is, so I'm not that young.
Okay. All right, hold on a second. Tovar, enlighten me, man. Help me learn as an individual.
He does not know. Ryan, I do not believe that you know who Gumby is.
Gumby? I know Forrest Gump. For crying out
loud. Dean, you had the little horse next to him also. Come on.
Gumby's the little green man. The little green man made out of like Play-Doh, essentially.
Okay, all right. Never mind.
You got it there.
That's a different show, different time. Forget it. Hey, Ryan, welcome to our show. Listen, Unlock the Middle there. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for bringing it full circle right there. Hey, Ryan, again, thank you so much for being with us. Why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about your background, yourself, your origin, your story, the different roles you've served in public education. Just give them a little snippet of you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you guys the Reader's Digest version. But my name is Ryan Tillman. I'm from SoCal. Been born and raised here. Had the opportunity after I got out of high school to go play college football at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where phenomenal time. Part of one of the most one of the highlights of my life, no doubt about it. Once I graduated from there in 2011 or 2010 rather, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and so at the time I graduated with a marketing degree. And thought I was going to go out there and take over the world with my new Fortune 500 company. And that actually fell short a few times. And so I got married to my beautiful bride. And once we got married, she got pregnant after probably about a year of being married. And, that was when it kind of really set in that I needed to get a real job, that the selling life insurance that I was doing at the time and part-time, I should say, and doing working at Abercrombie and Fitch as an assistant manager was probably not going to cut it. And so I needed a career change. And so my dad's friend at the time was like, you should be a cop. And I said, there's no way I'm about to be the popo. I'm not about to be the man. I'm not about to be a pig. That was my mentality, unfortunately. And I say that, just because that was just the real me. And, I was like, I'm no way I'm doing that. And so after praying about it, God just kind of opened up this door for me. And next thing I know, I found myself going into the profession of law enforcement, which was crazy because I despised the profession a lot because I had some bad experiences with officers growing up, so did my family members. And so after going into law enforcement, I graduated number 2 overall in my class, my academy class in 2014. Started out on the streets as a police officer, and that was right around the time that Michael Brown was killed in the city of Ferguson. The whole country went up in flames after the death of Michael Brown. And then what was interesting about it, that case was ultimately ended up determined to be justified. And so the country went up in flames all over a justified use of force. And during that time period, something interesting happened. I felt terrible about being a police officer, unfortunately. The reason I said I felt terrible is because as a black man, there was a lot of people in my own community that didn't understand what it was like to be a police officer. And so they called me Uncle Tom, they called me a coon, they called me a sellout. But then there was a lot of people within the professional law enforcement that didn't understand why the minority community had this strife in the first place. So I felt like I was in the middle and nobody understood what I was going through other than other minority officers. And so I had a conversation with my mom at the time, and my mom was like, I was sitting here thinking about what my son would have done had he been that officer in the Michael Brown shooting. And she said, after thinking about it, I thought, hey, you probably do the same exact thing, but it's only because he wants to come home to his wife and his kids and everybody at the end of the day. And that's when I had this light bulb moment where I just realized, I said, the only reason my mom sees it from that perspective is because her pumpkin, she calls me pumpkin, her pumpkin is a police officer. And that's the only reason why she saw it from that lens. And so that's when I realized, I said, I need to go out there, humanize the badge. I need to go out there, show who I am without the badge. So that way I can bridge that gap between law enforcement and the community. So in 2015, I went out there, start speaking in churches, which led to me speaking in schools, which led to me speaking in colleges, which led me to speaking in corporate. And then I just continued to evolve, and I created this company called Breaking Barriers United, which at the time, the sole purpose was to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. So it's since evolved into much more than that, where we're just not just bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community, but we're just bridging the gap between all areas and all sectors of life that need help and assistance. And so now we have enrichment programs in schools all across the country. I speak in schools still across the country. I consult for Dak Prescott from the Cowboys and Matthew McConaughey's Just Keep Living Foundation. And we just launched the book, Happy Eyes. So that's the short version of everything. So much more I can go into, and I guess that's why I'm here on this podcast.
Right.
Wow.
Hold on one second before you go, Chris. Ryan, just talk a little bit about that connection between police officer and schools and how important that is just to be able to make that connection, because guess what? We're all in this game together. I don't think that anybody in regards to whether it's law enforcement or schools, we want to make sure kids are on the right path. How does that look for you?
So that relationship with law enforcement and schools is so important. I can't understate that. The reason it is because right now our kids, right, they get so much information from these things. So they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, they're on what's called is it X now? I think it's what it's called now, Twitter. Elon Musk literally did that overnight. That's a story for a different day. But I woke up, I was like, what is this X on my phone? But they're on these social media platforms and they get their information from it. And so a lot of times when it comes to law enforcement, the videos that they see don't always paint the whole context of what actually happened when law enforcement had an interaction with the public. So over time, what happens is pop culture already tells these students to like, hey, we don't like cops are our enemy. And then you see these videos without context, it just adds fuel to that fire. And so by me going into the schools, it's so important for them to see me in a capacity that's not just law enforcement. Like the moment, it's funny when I walk into these schools, man, I walk in with my Jordans on, my fitted hat, like these kids don't even know I'm a cop. And then like, when I tell them finally, like that's like, I tell them I'm a cop, they're like, oh my goodness, like their jaw drops. I'm like, what, you ain't never seen a cop look this cool before? And so that kind of bridges that gap and breaks that barrier. And I really noticed that in my role as a police officer when I served as a school resource officer. I got to serve as a school resource officer for about 1.5 years. And that's when I really got to see the value of having officers connect with students. I remember when George Floyd was killed, everybody was saying, oh, get rid of school resource officers, get rid of them. And I was like, no, don't get rid of them. Just find the good ones to do the job. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so that was what I did. That was my mission. I think I did that pretty well. And, when I got promoted, I did this dance that was seen across the world and went viral, probably seen over 100 million times. But that was what it's actively like to visually see what it looks like when you have a good relationship with officers and your students.
I love that. Absolutely love that.
Man, Ryan, I'm listening to you. I've got a deep connection to law enforcement, and I would love to get into it a little bit. But tonight is about you in your book. So I sit here, Dean's follow-up question about the SRO piece and the connectivity to schools is really important. I'm wondering about what piece of advice you might have for a student who's considered at risk, on the edge. How do they avoid all of the distractions in their world and make decisions that's right?
So I think the best advice that I would give to them is a singular word that I want to use is exposure. They have to expose themselves to things or people that they're not accustomed to. For example, a lot of times when you're dealing with a lot of these at-risk students, they're accustomed to a certain type of culture. They're accustomed to the neighborhood. They're accustomed to a certain type of talk. And one of the biggest things that I've realized that has allowed me to succeed in life is that I've gotten exposed to other ways of life that have allowed me to realize that the things that I thought were unobtainable are obtainable. I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday, and I remember thinking back in the day, like, man, $1 million home is like, there's no way I could buy $1 million home. I'll ever be able to do that. But I've been exposed to so many people that have had success. And if you're listening to this, I don't want you to miss what I'm saying. I'm not trying to measure success based on the type of home you live in or the amount of money you make, but I'm using it as a point. The point that I'm making is that when you start to expose yourself to different things, it makes the unobtainable become obtainable. So if you're at risk and you want to be that person that, changes the game in your family, you want to be that person that breaks the cycle, you need to go see what breaking the cycle looks like and talk to people that have done it or that are doing things that nobody in your family has done. I had the opportunity of speaking at Boise State University last week or 2 weeks ago, and I spoke to all the football team. And I asked the people to raise their hand. I said, how many of you guys will be the first people to graduate from college, if that's you? So many of them raised their hand. And when they rose their hand, I said, so you have to understand something. You being at this university, it's bigger than football. It is much bigger than football. You are literally raising the bar for your family. And so the only reason you're able to do that is because you believed in yourself, but you also got to see what it's like to go and do that. So now, not only do I want you to go out there and graduate and have a great, successful career, but I want you to go back and be that exposure for somebody else that needs it.
So, Ryan, what your words are saying and the way you're connecting with our kids is crucial, especially as an SRO officer that a lot of us have had on campus. So let me ask you a two-part question about inspiring other people. Who inspired you when you were a student in school? Which teacher, which person connected with you to say, hey, you know what, let's keep pushing ahead? And also part of that whole concept of inspiration, what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah.
Awesome. Great question. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that my dad didn't inspire me. And I say that my dad passed away about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. And he is my hero in all different facets of life because he was the first example that I ever had. And so this is a conversation for a different day, but there is true value in having a father in a child's life. And there's a lot of value in that, but it takes a village. And my dad was not the only one in the village. And when I was in high school, some of the people that I remember the most that inspired me the most were my coaches in football. Because it was bigger, like I said a minute ago, it was much bigger than football. They taught me lessons about life. They taught me how to, get through adversity. They taught me how to overcome. They taught me how to have confidence in myself. And those relationships not only lasted in high school, but they've lasted through the marriage to my wife. They've lasted to the birth of my first child. They've lasted to a lot of the things that I still accomplish even to this day. And so I think by looking back at my coaches or, Amp or Brown or Coach Rubin, Coach Jimenez, those are all people that inspired me, and whether they realize it or not. And even my math teacher, and I'll use this as the last example, Mrs. Whitesell. She probably, I don't know if she's even going to hear this, but Mrs. Whitesell, can you guys still hear me and see me? Oh, okay, I froze on my end. But Mrs. Whitesell, she was my math teacher, and I hated math. Math, like to this day, I hate math. That's why I became a cop. But to this day, I hate math. But Miss Whitesell, she made it fun. She connected with me. She got to know me and know what made me tick. And because of that, it allowed me to get through math, which was one of the hardest things. And I still utilize principles that I learned from Miss Whitesell to kids now as I develop them, realizing that, look, I need to get to know them personally so that way I can understand what makes them tick, so that way they can succeed.
Hey, Ryan, you want to become Optimus Prime tomorrow?
Let's do it, man. Say less.
Call Ms. Whitesell and let her know you rock, lady. Check out the podcast. You just got the props.
If we can find her, we're going to tag her on this.
I will definitely do that. I got to find her. And I don't know if she's still teaching or not, but I will try to find her and do that, because Miss Whitesell, she was the bomb.
Hey, Ryan, my question is simple. Who was Adrian and what happened to him?
So great question. So Adrian was a kid that went to the school that I was a school resource officer at. And the unique thing about Adrian was Adrian came from we talk about kids that are at risk. Adrian, I would consider at risk, largely in part because his family was from the neighborhood. Like again, as a police officer, you have, I'm a school resource officer, so my primary job is there. But before I was a police officer or a school resource officer, I served a lot on the streets. And in doing so, you come in contact with a lot of different people in your city. Well, his family just so happened to be one of the families I was always in contact with, so much so that I arrested his dad multiple times. We went over their house. So when I got to see Adrian at school, I got to see him in a different environment. I got to see the true Adrian. And by getting to see him, I really realized, like, I took a lot of pride in mentoring him, because I can see like he was a kid that wanted so much more. So over time, we started to develop a relationship with him. I would talk to him about entrepreneurship. I would talk to him about, making better decisions. And he was one of those kids that was always like on that fine line. Like he could do really good or he can do really, really bad. And so fast forward to the summer year of his sophomore year, I was working on patrol because school was out, and there was a call for an unknown trouble that went out right around the corner from the high school. So I just so happened to be in the area. So I got there first. And as I pulled up to the unknown trouble, there was a kid laying on the ground, and there was somebody standing over him. So I ran up to the situation, don't know what was going on. And as I'm looking at this guy who's standing over the kid, he's like looking at me in shock, like, I don't know what just happened right now. So I turn over the kid, and it just so happens to be Adrian. And as I'm looking at Adrian, he's bleeding from his chest. And so I realized that Adrian had been shot through his chest. And so now I am holding, applying pressure to Adrian's chest, telling him to stay with me. And it was probably one of the most crazy experiences of my life, because, I had been on homicide investigations before. I've been on assault with deadly weapon investigations before. But it's another thing when you're dealing with somebody that you know and that you're connected to. Yeah. And I've seen many people, unfortunately, take their last breath, and it looked like Adrian was going to take his last breath. He was literally like foaming at the mouth. He was turning as pale as a concrete. And I remember slapping him in his face multiple times, like, hey, stay with me, stay with me. And like, I could see so much fear in his eyes. So as this is going on, I remember just like kind of looking around, and I look up and I see some kids sitting on an adjacent wall. And one of the kids was pushing something shiny into the ground. And I was like, what is that? So I look up, and as I'm holding on to Adrian's chest, like I told my partners to say, hey, go stop him. So they stop him, and then they realize he's pushing bullets into the ground. We're like, that's weird. Why is he pushing bullets into the ground? So the ambulance finally got there, which seemed like an eternity, and they rushed him to the hospital. And as they rush him into the hospital, I'm just outside pacing back and forth, just kind of like wondering like what just happened. And this older lady she's walking up, and she approaches me, and I was kind of like weird, like, who is this random person walking up to me? And she's like, points me out. She says, hey, are you Officer Tillman? I said, yeah, how'd you know that? She says, I'm Adrian's grandmother. And Adrian talks about you so much at home. He talks about how he may want to be a police officer. He talks about how he wants to start his own business. And it was at that moment I realized the actual impact that I had in Adrian's life. And it really made me recognize the work that I was doing in these schools. So I was with her, talking to her for a little bit. I go and talk to the nurse, and I asked the nurse, like, hey, how's he looking? She says, it's not looking good. She says, anybody that loses 3 quarts of blood, the odds aren't in their favor of surviving. So I remember just praying for Adrian. I prayed with his grandmother, prayed with the family. And meanwhile, kids are coming up, and they're asking how Adrian's doing. But it was just weird how they were asking the question, because it was just very, very weird. And so I'm telling you some of these other points because to make another point. And so, anyways, I tell the family, hey, I have to run, I have to go handle something else, but I'm gonna call you the first moment I get. So I leave, I go to this graduation that night. Then the next morning, I'm up in front of another school speaking, and the whole time I'm speaking, Adrian's on my mind. So finally, I finished my speaking engagement. I call Adrian's mom, and I'm already bracing myself to hear, like, hey, Adrian didn't make it through the night. Adrian, I'm already bracing myself to hear those words. And as the phone is ringing and ringing, the phone answers, and finally I hear, Officer Tillman, man, that was crazy, right? And I was like, Adrian? He was like, yeah. He was like, that was crazy. I was like, bro, crazy is an understatement, bro. You almost died. So literally that day I literally got in my car. I wasn't working that day. And so I went to the mall, got him a hat because he loved hats, and drove to the hospital and went and saw Adrian. And it's funny because as I'm sitting in the room with Adrian, like his dad walks in, who I arrested multiple times. Some of his other family members, like they're from the neighborhood. When I say that, I'm like not playing, like they're from the neighborhood. And so it's weird because you see a cop sitting in there with all these guys that typically I would be running for warrants or checking to see, like, hey, you got any drugs on you? But this day, we weren't doing any of those cat and mouse games. We all came together for the sake of Adrian. And the reason we did that is because, Adrian was somebody's son. Adrian was somebody's brother.
Right.
I have a son. I'm a brother to somebody. And so we all were able to connect because we had this, what I always like to say, we had love, empathy, and respect for one another. And so that's what allowed me to realize the true value of connection. So go back to those other things that I was talking about. This is what I tell the students. And so if you're a student listening to this, I want you to pay attention to this part. I told you about the bullets that were being pressed into the ground. I told you about the kids that were asking about them. We found out after the fact that Adrian was actually set up he went there. He made a stupid decision to go sell vape pens. And for $200, the plan was we're going to take the vapes and then we're going to take our money back. We're going to shoot them so that way we get both, and we're going to leave them there to die. And so when they were coming, they were trying to press the bullets into the ground to try to hide the evidence. And then they were showing up to the hospital not to see if he was going to survive, but to see if he was going to die. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell students, I said, look, like, I know you care. I know you have a lot of friends in your life. I know you care about them, but you got to make sure you're making good choices and good decisions. And as an officer, I've seen so many people turn their back on others when their back is up against the wall. So there's so many lessons to learn from that story, from the fact of connection and how you see the best in all people, but also how to make better decisions so you don't find your situation in something like Adrian.
Damn, Ryan.
Ryan, I'm not surprised that you bought him a hat. So I'm just that's fantastic.
Always.
There's the empathy and compassion.
Always.
Ryan, I'm listening to you talk about this. I'm listening to the at-risk kid. I'm listening to the personal experience and the trauma associated with this type of life that kids in our charge live every single day. And congratulations on being. I know you're not going to label yourself a hero, but you've got
that guy
heroic efforts. That drive opportunities. And if you could talk a little bit about the philosophy of your book and, thinking about the world that we live in, what advice do you have for educators, at this point in time?
Great question. So the philosophy of my book is this, would you guys agree that we probably live in probably one of the most divisive times that our nation has ever seen, at least in our lifetime?
100.
You go on all the social media, you turn on the news, and it's always the left versus right, blue versus red. It's this topic versus that topic. And it's almost like we've forgotten how to truly connect with one another. It's really scary, and it's only getting worse. One of the things I see when I walk in, and when I first walk into auditoriums and start to speak to kids, is I see the kids sitting in with AirPods and they're all looking at their phone. And I remember when I was in school, we'd be talking to your person to your left, talking to your person to your right. It's all rowdy and stuff. And the teacher's got to quiet you down, but they're quieting you down because you're connecting with your friend. Now it's almost too quiet because they're connecting with their phone. And the reason that's an issue is because we have no longer figured out ways to have relationships and connection with one another. If you don't agree with me, if we don't think alike, if we don't have the same philosophies, then we're no longer going to have a relationship. And I'm going to stick to people that I like. I actually start the book with actually having the reader do an activity. And I say, I want you to go through your phone and I want you to look at all the people that you follow. And I want you to see if you can identify how much similarities you have with the people that you follow. The reality is that most of the people you follow, there's something similar that you like about that person, which is why you follow them. You don't follow people that you don't necessarily like or that differ from you. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't want people to think it's a bad thing, but it's something to recognize. And what made me do that was I remember years ago, people would always tell me, well, you're the only good police officer that exists. Every other police officer is bad and corrupt. And I'm like, well, before me, had you ever had an experience with a good police officer? No. I said, do you believe that good experiences with police officers exist? Well, yeah. So just because you've never seen a good police officer experience something good, does that mean it doesn't exist? Well, no. And so I'm like, well, do you follow any good police officers on your social media page? No. Do you know any good police officers? Well, no. Well, maybe it's time to go find some good police officers or follow some pages that are doing good work. The point in saying all that is that you're only going to believe what you follow. And the reason why it's so important to do that is so that way you can bridge these divides. So the purpose of my book is, how do you see the best in everybody, despite what their value system is, despite what their beliefs are, and without compromising your own value system? And I think that's the important part, is I've learned to develop so many different relationships with people as high as Michael Strahan and all these and billion-dollar people, to the person that's homeless, and had a really, really good relationship. I mean, literally today I hopped in a Lyft and I connected with my Lyft driver. I've never met this guy in my life. And I can do all that without compromising who I am or what my structure is. And the only way you can do that is by leading with love. Love is one of the primary factors. My dad would always tell me, you need to love your brother. You need to love your neighbor as you would love your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your cousin. The next thing is you need to be able to empathize with people. Now, a lot of people mistake what empathy is. Empathy is not necessarily having to have the same experience as a person. A lot of times people say, well, I've never had that experience with them, so I can't empathize. But there's one thing that we all connect on despite the experience that we've had, and that's emotion. Every single one of you guys in your lifetime, I would imagine, has experienced a level of sadness. Every single one of you on this call today has probably experienced a level of happiness. Every single one of you guys has probably experienced a level of excitement. So we've all experienced those same emotions. And so what empathy requires is that you just connect with them on an emotional level as opposed to an experience level. And if you can understand the emotions that a person is experiencing, now you can connect with them as opposed to getting distracted by trying to connect on experience. And the last one is respect. I've had the opportunity to go speak in prisons a couple times now. And when you talk to prisoners in these prisons that have been incarcerated forever, when the rubber meets the road, a lot of them were in there because somebody disrespected them. They disrespected me. They disrespected the neighborhood. Yep. There's a high value that's put on respect. There's an old saying, you respect me, I respect you. And so if we learn how to respect one another, then we can start to move forward and break the barriers and start to come out of this thing together.
Those basic tenets, are so important. So we sit there and think about education, right? We've got 125 kids on our caseload or on our class roster. What are our classroom norms? What are our classroom expectations? How do we as a community move forward? We've got these kiddos for 6 hours a day, right? And if we can go ahead and impart on them these points, Ryan, we're going to go ahead and have a really good situation down the line. Thank you.
Amen to that. And for teachers, if you're listening to this, learn to see the best in your students. Trust me, I know they're knuckleheads. I know some of them are knuckleheads. I know some of them are just out there. And I know y'all get back to you'll go to your teacher group and y'all like, man, this kid and that kid, and y'all say these different things. And that's okay. It's normal. It's a human thing. But you need to learn to see the best in them, because what you don't realize is that their upbringing may be different from your upbringing. What you might see in their behavior is what you don't understand the foundation of where that behavior is coming from. It's coming from a place, and just because you don't understand it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't connect with them. And so if you learn how to see the best in your students, I guarantee you will hit every single day in that classroom differently. Like, it will mean something different to you. I couldn't relate to Adrian, but I found ways to connect with them because I saw the best in them.
Yeah, they're our knuckleheads. That's the problem. They are our knuckleheads. We have to love them and meet them where they're at. Thank you.
There it is.
JT, you're up.
Hey, Ryan, talk to people about happy eyes. What do you talk to about happy eyes?
Yeah, so everything I just mentioned, I always like to say you adopt your own set of happy eyes, which is basically seeing the best in people. And where happy eyes actually came from, when I met my beautiful wife in college. We met, and the moment we locked eyes, we basically, it's kind of cliche, but we basically fell in love with one another. And one day we were over text message. She would always call me happy eyes. And so one day I was like, why do you call me happy eyes? She said, because even when you're not smiling, you're always smiling with your eyes. And I think the reason why I always smile with my eyes is, but going back to what I just mentioned, I always try to see the best in people. As crazy as it may seem, but by doing that, it naturally allows me to smile with my eyes. And so, if we can all adopt our own set of happy eyes and learn to see the best in everybody we come in contact with, then the world around you is going to start to change, and you will realize that you are the person that's changing it.
So let me take it one step further here, and let's talk about will there be any more books coming out? And how has your family reacted to this book coming out? How have they come together? How have they embraced you going from on the street beat, somebody who is a police officer, working with kids, working in schools, and now an author? Think about this for a second. That doesn't just happen overnight. I can only imagine how your family has embraced that, and what has that turned into?
So what it's turned into is, I told my wife when I first started writing the book, I said, this is bigger than book sales. This is much bigger than getting new contracts, speaking contracts, because I'm a published author. It's about my legacy. And I said, in 100 years from now, prayfully we'll have great grandchildren, and they'll be able to pick up a book that their great grandfather wrote, and they'll be able to hear the words of their great grandfather. That to me is legacy. In the book, there's a subtitle that is titled "Every School Has a Name." And the reason it's subtitled "Every School Has a Name" is because think about how many schools you guys all work at. Schools. Think about all the schools that you guys have had experience with that have a name on it that's named after a person. And I always tell people, it's not named after a person for any reason. King High School, Cesar Chavez High School. The reason it's named after some person is because that person went on and did something to leave their mark on our world, on our community. And so that I use that as a reminder for myself that, what we live for today is much bigger than just making dollars and cents. It's much bigger than just showing up and teaching a subject. It's all about the legacy that you'll leave. There's a reason why at 36 years old, I can remember Miss Whitesell's name. It's because she left an impact on my life. There's a reason why I can remember Brown and Harper and Coach Rubin and Coach Jimenez, is because they left an imprint. That imprint is what I like to call legacy. And so we talk about what this book has meant for my family. This is just another imprint for my family. So that way, when I'm gone, I'll still technically be here.
Love it. Love it.
Awesome. As I sit here and listen to you, Ryan, I'm intrigued, an awful lot. What, if you could, what's your favorite story from the book?
Oh, that's a good one. So I have a great story. It's actually the way I start the book. It's one of the stories I start the book with, but I end the book with this. And if you guys haven't bought my book, make sure you're not talking about you guys, but if you're listening to it, make sure you guys buy the book. But I'm unfortunately, I'm gonna spoil one of the big stories in the book because it's just that cool of a story. But there was a situation when I was working as a patrol officer, beat officer, and we responded to a child abuse investigation. So as I'm at this child abuse investigation, I'm the backup officer. So my job as the backup officer is just to kind of stand by and make sure my partner doesn't get hurt or assassinated. That's my job. So I'm just standing there, just kind of listening as she's doing her investigation. And the caller basically was a 16-year-old girl that basically said her dad had slapped her in the face, causing her to bleed. So typically in my profession, even though I love people and I try to lead with love, empathy, and respect, I don't really have a lot of respect for people that abuse children. So, doesn't mean I'm not going to respect them, and it doesn't mean that I'm not going to treat them fairly, but it's just, that's not a person that I don't want to typically have a relationship with at that moment in time. So anyways, I'm just standing there and I'm watching over the suspect, supposed alleged suspect, and he's sitting on the couch. And so as I'm sitting there, I'm just looking around the house. And as I'm looking around the house, it was a clean kept house and everything was good. It was my partner talking to the victim. And I look at his TV stand. And as I'm looking at his TV stand, I see all these different books. And one of the books stood out to me. It's a book called Kingdom Man by a man by the name of Tony Evans. And Tony Evans is a pastor in Dallas, Texas. And so I was like, oh, wow, I love that book. It's one of the best books I've ever read. So I was like, oh, wow, this guy listens to Tony Evans. So I start to talk to this guy. I'm like, oh, you like Tony Evans? He's like, yeah, man, like Tony Evans is a great guy, man, great pastor. I've been listening to him for a long time. he's really helped me be a better man. I'm like, oh yeah, he's helped me be a better man in many ways. I actually named one of my old license plate was named after that book. And so I got to talking about him more. And so when I start to talk to him more, I start to ask him like, man, what happened today? And he's like, man, unfortunately, he said, my daughter, my 16-year-old daughter, she's going through this phase and she's just acting reckless. I mean, she's been sneaking boys into the house when me and my wife are sleeping. She called my wife the B word today. She's not doing her homework. And today, the reason I lost is because when me and my wife was trying to tell her to do something, she literally called my wife the B word. And I just lost it. And he said, so I slapped her in her face. And like, he was like, I know it was wrong. I know I shouldn't have done that. But, he was like, man, I'm really trying. He's like, I have 5 or 4 other children. I'm trying to be the best dad I can be. I'm working hard and doing all this other stuff. At that moment, I found connection because I realized, as opposed to looking at him as a suspect, I'm looking at him as a dad of, I'm a dad of three children myself. I know how hard it is. I'm a hardworking man. My wife is a hardworking woman, and we have a lot of values in our house. And so now I'm like, man, like I'm not looking at him in the eyes of a criminal now. Doesn't mean he didn't make a mistake, but I'm not looking at him as a criminal. So anyways, this investigation is going on. My partner comes. I'm like, hey, so what do you got? What do you talk to everybody? You talk to witness. She said, hey, basically what you said is what I got. It basically matches up. So in our profession, we have the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. Letter of the law means that you have to basically enforce the law as it's laid out in the books. Spirit is you can give a little leeway. Well, when it comes to child abuse, there's not much spirit of the law. We're not going to play with it. We're going to do our job because that's the right thing to do. And so at that moment in time, I already knew like, hey, even though this is a good guy, it sounds like he's going to have to get arrested. Never been arrested before in his life. So I tell the guy, I say, hey, man, I understand what's going on today. You did make a mistake, but this is not going to be the end for you. I said, unfortunately, we're going to have to arrest you. But I said, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to treat you like a criminal. I'm not going to parade you through your neighborhood so everybody sees that you're under arrest and now everybody's in your business. I'm not even going to handcuff you around your children. I'm going to wait till we get to my car to handcuff you. I'm going to treat you with the decency of a man. And he says, Officer Tillman, I appreciate that. So we walk him to his car. I walk him to my police car. I said, give me one promise. You better not try to kill me. He said, I'm not going to try to kill you. I said, all right, cool. Because I'm technically kind of going against some of the officer safety constraints that we make for ourselves. So we walk to my car. I open my door away from everybody. And then once we open the door, that's when I put him in handcuffs and I sit him in the car. Now I'm a very spiritual man. Everybody's entitled to their own beliefs, and I'm very spiritual. So I said, hey, man, you mind if I pray for you? He was like, man, I will love it if you pray for me. So I prayed for this guy, put him in the backseat of the car, and he goes off to jail. My partner takes him to jail. And so I'm getting ready to leave. Now it's lunchtime. I got tacos and everything waiting. I'm like, man, I'm hungry. I'm starving. I've been thinking about food this whole time. And so as I get in my car, I just feel in my spirit like, hey, go back and pray for the family. So I'm like, oh no, it's God. It feels weird. Go back, pray for them. So I go back, I knock on the door, and I go back and pray for this family. And so actually I knock on the door and I'm like, the mom opens the door and I'm like, ma'am, this is going to sound so weird. So forgive me, but just, that's my disclaimer. And she's like, what is it? I was like, do you mind if I just pray for you and your family? She's like, oh my goodness. I was actually praying that you would come back and pray with us. And so I was like, wow. So I go, we're in the living room now. It's all like, it's me, all the kids are arguing with one another. Some of the kids are like, you shouldn't have called. The other kid is like, well, he did get hit. And it's just, everybody's divided. So we grab hands, we pray, there's tears flowing, everybody's crying and stuff like that. We hug it out and I leave. So I thought that situation was done. It was over with. Fast forward 3 months later, me and my family were getting ready to take a trip to Hawaii. I had the genius idea of telling my wife that, hey, our flight is at 8:30 in the morning. As long as we leave the house by 7, flying out of LAX, we'll be fine. My wife, being the beautiful lady that she is, listens to her fearless leader, and we get in the car around 7:30, driving to one of the busiest airports in America. There's traffic. We get to the airport around 8 o'clock. Mind you, we're taking off at like 8:30, 8:45. And when we pull into the airport, it's like serpentine. And in my mind, I'm sweating bullets. I'm like, literally, like, I am about to, like, my wife's going to divorce me after this. So anyways, we get there, we get out of our car. When we walk up, the lines now are serpentine just to check in. And I'm like, we're going to miss our flight. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. My wife I could already looking at her, but she didn't even say much to me, but I already knew what she was thinking. So I'm like, okay. So as we walk up to the line, somebody recognizes me, which is not uncommon because a lot of times I go places and people recognize me. So the guy's like, hey man, he's like, hey man, how you doing? I'm like, hey man, so good seeing you, man. I don't really have time to talk, but so good. I was like, let me at least check in and I'll come say my goodbyes. He's like, all right, cool, to go do your thing. So I went to the little kiosk, I checked in or whatever, or like tried to check in something. It wasn't working. So I came back, saw the guy again, and he's like, man, I'm like, hey man, how you doing? And he's like, and the guy worked for the airlines that I'm flying out of. He's like, man, it's so good seeing you. He's like, where are you going? I was like, man, we're going to Hawaii. And I was like, man, we're running late. I said, he was like, really? He says, man, come with me. So he takes me up to the front of the counter, bypass all the serpentine. He reaches across the counter and he's like, tells them whatever. And so now me and my family are checked in immediately. He's like, hey, I want you to go to this security line and you're going to bypass a lot of the security traffic. Just tell them I sent you. So we get up there. We bypass the security. Once we get through the security, the guy that works at the gate is like, hey, where you guys going? We're like, Hawaii. He's like, oh, you guys are they're getting ready to leave. He says, hop on the cart. I'll drive you to your gate. So they drive us to the gate. We're running through the airport like Home Alone because I got, it's me, my wife, and 2 kids at the time. And so by the time we got to our gate, everybody was already on the plane. So we get on the plane and we sit down. And I'm just like, I can't believe we just made it. As soon as our butts hit the seat, the plane took off. And so my wife looks over to me. She was like, how did you know that dude? And I said, you're never going to believe this. I said, that guy that actually took us to the front of the plane is the guy I arrested 3 months ago. And she said, are you serious? I said, yeah. I said, out of all places, you're never going to realize he's here to help us. And so the reason I share that story is because you never know who you can impact. You never know whose lives you can change. And not only do you not know whose lives you can change, they might just change your life as well. And so here I am 3 months ago thinking I'm helping him out, thinking I'm doing what's right by his family. Little did I know that I was going to need his help 3 months later. And so that's probably one of the best stories of that book, just because I will never forget it. And I still trip out to this day.
Right, man. Kindness begets kindness, man. We always try to do what's right, and we don't do it because it's going to come back to us. But that story is an example of why we should do what's right, because it may just come back to us. Thank you, man.
100%.
Hey, Ryan, do us a favor. Put up that book again so people could see it. How can people reach out to you? How can they connect to you? Talk about your website real quick. Let us know, where can we purchase that book?
Yeah, so you can get Happy Eyes. You can go either on Amazon directly, type in Ryan Tillman, type in Happy Eyes, it will come up. Or you can go on my website, breakingbarriersunited.com, and there's a link to the book on there. And you can find me on all my social media platforms, Breaking Barriers United, on everything, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And it's cool. If you notice, I had Dak Prescott write the foreword. So if you're a Cowboys fan, at the very least, get the book, because your quarterback of the team wrote the foreword for my book, which is really awesome. He's a phenomenal guy. I talked to him yesterday. He's at training camp. And so he's just a wonderful guy on and off the field.
Awesome.
Well, there it is right there. I mean, Ryan Tillman, I'm sitting here just smiling, because you talk about impact, you talk about creating connections, you talk about, opening pathways for people and understanding them, meeting them where they're at, and coming back to you full circle. You hit on everything, man. That's an inside the park home run as far as I'm concerned. From an educational standpoint, everything you talked about is what every principal, every teacher, everybody involved in education should be looking to do each and every day, man. And tell me if I'm wrong, because I think that is just super special to listen to.
Man, thank you, brother. That's the goal, man. And everything I say is all because I've lived it. I've read so many books, and a lot of times you read books and you're like, well, is this philosophy or is this experience? Because there's a difference. Philosophy means in theory it should work, but experience means it does work because you've gone through it. And so everything I try to preach is based off of my experience and not just a philosophy. Not to say that philosophy is wrong. And so you're right on. And if you're a teacher or staff member or administrator listening to this, I would love to come out to your school and talk. I'm actually talking to a staff next week about, I have a presentation called Happy Eyes, how to see the best in all your staff and your students. So I would love to come out and do a training with you in your organizations.
Changing culture right there, man. I love it. Right. Hey, Ryan, one more thing on behalf of Josh and Chris. Any last bit of advice you'd give to any teacher or administrator out there, any child in education? What would you say to them to help them just kind of ease into this year coming up, and more importantly, to own themselves as a person?
Man, I love that. That's a great question, man. I think the best advice I can give would just be live in the moment. live in the moment and enjoy the moment. And the reason I said it is because, unfortunately, man, you just never know. Tomorrow is not promised. The next minute is not promised. I've seen so many people, unfortunately, take their last breath, and I've learned that I need to cherish every moment that I have with my kids, with my wife, with impact. And so if you just live in the moment and just enjoy that time and know that you can change 1% of the world, it makes everything different. One of the examples I tell the kids to do when I speak is I say, raise your hand if you own an iPhone. And everybody's hand goes in the air with the exception of a couple of Samsung users. And I'm like, okay, we'll convert you later. It's okay. You're turning my messages green.
That's Josh Toba down there. He's
Sorry.
still an iPhone guy. He's an Android.
Oh man, you're the one that's turning my messages green. You're the one that's turning my messages green. But I always tell him, and I always say, you know what? One person, Steve Jobs, changed the world. Yeah. So it only takes 1% of the population to literally change the world. And so if there's any advice I can give is live in the moment, strive to be the 1% because 1% changes the world.
Love it.
1%. Josh, take us home, man.
Hey, thank you, Ryan. Awesome guest today. Love it, love it, love it. But hey, we're not done. Hey, Dean, Chris, we ain't done. This Thursday, Red Zone Podcast Smash 4. Number 4. So join us for other educators coming together, sharing their stories, sharing their whole ideas of their podcast. Join us this Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern for Podcast Smash 4. Thanks to these guys coming up with this idea, Dean and Chris. Great job. Let's go home.
Let's take it home. Chris, you want to bring us home? Touch all the bases?
Yeah, what more is there to say? Ryan, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your perspective, your philosophy, your lifestyle with us. We learned a tremendous amount. And, as educators and as connectors to kids, we have a lot more in our bag to be able to bring forth to our faculty and staff to help them out because of you. Thanks so much on behalf of Dean and Josh, Chris Starcheski, principal of Grafton Middle School. Unlock the Middle here to make sure that you have opportunities to be better. Let's get better, people.
There it is right there. Don't ever forget.
Hang tight, Ryan.
Hey, hold on, guys. Have a great week, everybody, and enjoy those kids and enjoy what you do because you are